Morning, everyone. Sorry we're a bit late. One of the authority members parked across 2 parking spaces. Not saying a word, Onka. Okay, welcome everyone to the another day, another budget. Welcome to the full Fire Authority meeting. If you bear with me for a second, I'll get my script out. So we have started recording, have we, Molly? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we've got apologies from Councillor Hayward, Murphy and Kent. Any others? No? Brilliant. Okay, emergency evacuation procedures, I shall pass on to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. We're not planning a alarm test today, so if the fire alarm does go off, then there is a fire exit through the main entrance, and then the RVP is on the main green. There's also a fire exit towards the back of the room on the left there. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chief. Do we have any declarations of interest? There's been none advised before the meeting. No? Good. And no public access. So, moving on to Chair's business. Just to confirm for the recording that this Avon Fire Authority meeting is taking place at St Michael's Centre, Stoke, Gifford. We are also recording the meeting for the public to view on our YouTube channel. And I will pass over now to Zoe.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just a polite reminder, if I may, hopefully you're all now aware, I'm deaf. Strategically placed around the room are my Bluetooth Roger devices to assist me with engaging with you during this meeting, hearing you. But please could I ask that you use your microphones, speak up, try not to speak over one another, because that would really help me, and I'm sure it will help others in the room as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Zoe. Okay, we'll have the members introduce themselves now. I'm Councillor Paul Goggin, Hartcliffe and Withywood Ward, Bristol City Council, and I'm Chair of the Fire Authority. Moving to my left.
I'm Jane Stansfield, Thornbury Ward in South Gloucestershire.
I'm David Wilcox, representing Lockleys Ward in the fine city and county of Bristol.
Councillor Onkarseni, Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor May, I'm Vice Chair of the Fire Authority and I represent Pensford and Whitchurch Village, close to Bristol.
Dan Thomas, Councillor for Congsbury and Puxton on North Somerset Council.
Robin Moss, Westfield Ward, Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Councillor Raj Sood, representing French Endowment from South Gloucestershire. Thank you.
Councillor Ron Hardy, representing Emerson's Green in South Gloucester.
Annie Townsend, representing Central Ward in Bristol.
Councillor Tom Menhard, representing Horfield Ward in Bristol City Council.
Councillor Richard Eddy, Bishopsworth, Bristol.
Good morning, I'm Robert Payne, Councillor for Weston-super-Mare Central on North Somerset Council.
Councillor Yassin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill Ward, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, Councillor Matthew Riddle from South Gloucestershire, representing the Severn Vale Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Kieran Cronley, Winterstoke Ward, North Somerset Council.
That's brilliant. Okay, and in the same direction, I'd like to ask the officers to introduce themselves now, please.
Good morning, members. Good morning, officers. Matt Cook, Chief Fire Officer.
Good morning, everybody. Luke Gazzard, Assistant Chief Officer for Service Delivery.
Good morning, everyone. Richard Welch, another Assistant Chief Fire Officer.
Good morning, all. Paula Lyons, Assistant Chief Fire Officer of Portfolio.
Yeah. Good morning, Claire Bentley, Head of Finance.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services.
Good morning, I'm Verity Truscott, Statutory Finance Officer.
Thank you, Zoe Coombs, Clerk and Monitoring Officer.
Thank you. It's nice to have so many of us here. I don't think we could have fitted many more in anyway. I'm going to pass over now to Assistant Chief Gazard to talk about the recent memorial service we had for Fleur Lombard and the red plaque.
Thank you, Chair. This was a 30th memorial for the passing of Fleur Lombard, who was a firefighter in Avon who sadly passed away on the 4th of February 1996 at what was then Leo's supermarket in Staple Hill, Bristol. So we have a memorial every year, and directly opposite there's a memorial plaque and a bit of a garden there as well. But this year, being the 30th anniversary, we held a slightly bigger event on the request of the family. It was very well attended, absolutely fantastic. There was over 70 people in attendance. The family came down from Derbyshire and Darlington, which was really nice. Lots of ex-retired people who worked with Fleur, who were at the incident, and a lot of new people, and a number of councillors as well, members of the public. So it was absolutely a fantastic event. We then went to Kingswood Fire Station, where the Fire Brigades Union unveiled a red plaque, similar to the sort of blue plaques you may see around towns and cities. And that was in Fleur's memory as well. It's a really fantastic event. The family were very, very grateful and really appreciated the time and effort that we put in for it, and the fact we still hold Fleur's memory in such high esteem.
Thank you. And if members will allow, we'll take a minute's silence now, just, I think, if we'd like to stand. Thank you. Okay, moving on. We were honoured to welcome officers from the Gambia Fire and Rescue Service to the UK as part of our ongoing work with GAFSIP. During their visit, the team took part in a wide range of training, including administration and leadership, incident command and operations, fire scene investigations, press relations and business fire safety. It was a fantastic opportunity to share expertise, strengthen international ties and learn from one another, all in support of safer, more resilient communities. And it was lovely to meet them at Temple Fire Station, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to thank them for the lovely little gift that they left for me. We now move on to the upcoming Fire Service Awards, which I think are on the 24th?
Next Thursday.
Yeah, next Thursday. They'll be held at Ashton Gate, and good luck and congratulations to all the winners, nominees and long service good conduct recipients at the Avon Fire and Rescue Service Awards. Oh, sorry, my bad. Taking place on the 19th of February. The evening will celebrate achievement, career milestones and the incredible stories. All of this will recognise the exceptional achievements of our colleagues across Avon Fire and Rescue Service. A special thank you to our sponsors for supporting us in celebrating the outstanding achievements of our staff and making the awards possible. So that should be a nice evening. Donation of foam to Moldova is the next item, and due to a change in UK legislation regarding the ingredients allowed within our firefighting foam, and relevant expiry dates, we were required to and expecting to replace 15,000 litres of firefighting foam. It was still viable as firefighting foam, and we had been told that it would cost us approximately £100,000 just to get rid of it. And our head of fleet, Matt Derrick, and Assistant Chief Welch reached out to FireAid, the fantastic Claire, a charity which supports other countries' fire services during time of difficulties. They've got a brilliant charity called Brave Minds, which offers free counselling to any Ukrainian firefighters, and they were instrumental in helping us get the fire engines across to Odessa recently. So we asked if Ukraine would benefit from us, and unfortunately there was a diktat from the central government that they couldn't accept this kind of foam. So we asked the Moldovan Fire Service, and they were also a great help during our donation. We did the handover with the Moldovan Fire Service, and we stayed with them on one of the evenings. We asked them if they would like it, and they said, oh, yes, please. So FireAid made the logistical arrangements. The foam was collected on February the 4th, and I believe it got there yesterday. Is that right, Rich? Brilliant.
It did, just the afternoon.
So this donation and transport cost us around £5,000, which obviously, using pretty simple maths, equated in a saving of around £95,000 for our budget against the disposal in the UK, and more importantly, it's given, as I said, viable firefighting foam to the Moldovan Fire Service. So now just a few bits of housekeeping. Can I ask you please to use your microphones when you're speaking, and remember to turn them off. The reason why is that it makes your voice come across on our video recording. There will be voting today using a show of hands. I will ask for any votes against, followed by any abstentions, and then those in favour. And obviously, if you could just make sure your mobile phones are off or on silent. So moving on to agenda item 6, which is minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Avon Fire Authority from the 28th of November 2025. I'd like to move that they are an accurate representation of the meeting, unless anybody has any amendments. No, that's good. Okay, I'd like to move that. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Richard. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And all those in favour? Okay, now I'm going to try and approve all the committee minutes as one. The reason why is that they obviously have already been agreed by the relevant committees, so we have a fairly robust sense that they're correct anyway. But I'd also, if possible, like to deal with the confidential minutes now as well, so that we won't need to go into exempt at the end of the meeting. So, I'm looking at the minutes of the ordinary meeting of AJOC on the 19th of September, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the PRC from the 1st of October, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Local Pension Board from the 24th of July 2025, and then the confidential minutes of AJOC from the 19th of September, the confidential minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Policy and Resources Stage 2 Internal Dispute Resolution Procedure from the 1st of October, and the confidential minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Local Pension Board, from the 24th of July 2025. So, does anybody have any amendments or additions? bearing in mind, please don't bring up anything in the confidential minutes. No? Okay, I'd like to propose that that whole batch of minutes is a correct and fair representation. Paul, you can second that. That's brilliant. Any votes against? Any abstentions? All those in favour? I'll sign those and pass them on to the clerk. So, moving on to agenda item 8, which is the Fire Authority meeting dates, 2026-2027, and I'll pass on to Zoe for this.
Thank you, Paul. So hopefully you have all had the opportunity to read what is essentially a fairly short but important paper. It's a paper with one recommendation, and that is asking that you please approve the proposed schedule of meetings for the year 26-27 for the Fire Authority and committees. The meeting dates have been suggested, proposed to ensure that they align with key financial and other deadlines, but they may be subject to some amendment to avoid clashes once we know all of the unitary authorities' meeting dates. We're waiting for those to be finalised for all the authorities for the year 26-27 in terms of the council and cabinet meetings. So a fairly, hopefully straightforward recommendation. The proposal is that member briefings and training can continue to take place on separate dates to enable sufficient focus on the key issues. It's proposed that meetings will commence at 10:30 unless otherwise indicated, with members' briefings at 1 o'clock. Again, unless otherwise indicated, and that at least one of those members' briefings would take place at a fire station to ensure that you will have the opportunity to experience a working fire station. And as I say, these dates will be checked against the unitary authority meeting dates once we've had those confirmed. So that's all I have to say at this stage, unless anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Zoe. As you can see, there's a table of the proposed dates. Obviously, as Zoe said, they may change. Does anybody have any... Robert?
Yeah, can you... Am I reading this correctly, that meetings, or the principle of holding meetings in different parts of the area is being abandoned now, because it says that all meetings will take place in the HQ or at Severn Park? Is that right?
Yeah, it's proposed that all meetings do take place predominantly at the headquarters, with Severn Park as the backup if headquarters is unavailable. And as for the reasons outlined in the paper, that is for resourcing to ensure that we are achieving best value for money in terms of our meeting venues, and it will put us more in line with other authorities, certainly in the neighbouring services, where all authority meetings and committee meetings are held at their headquarters.
Yeah, I think that's a bit disappointing if we're not going to be moving around the area, like to venues like this, because I think those, the HQ and Severn Park are not very convenient to get to by any means other than private car.
Thanks, Robert. Councillor?
Since we've been moving around to all the different venues, I found that I've had to use private car to get to all of them, because from where I live, I've got one bus, and like here, it would take me an hour and 11 minutes to get here using that one bus, and 20 minutes to get here in a car. So it's not convenient for everybody to be in all the different places. I'm using a car for all of them.
Yeah, it's not straightforward. Tom?
So the recommendation in front of us obviously about the dates rather than the venues, but I do think it's worth just perhaps picking this up outside of the meeting and just working this through a bit more, because I think I recognise that for some colleagues it is a bit of an issue.
Just a question on the members' briefing. They usually, previously started at 11 o'clock rather than 1 o'clock. Was there some understanding, a bit more understanding why they're changing time there?
The proposal for change in time, 5.2, I have, or of the report, I have been looking at the availability of officers in terms of our timings and capacity for members' briefings that would be timely for yourselves, and the afternoons tend to sit better for officers in terms of meetings that are already committed to and other things that they already have in diaries. So it's proposed it be after lunch as well, so that then with a short comfort break, that it should ensure then that members' briefing runs fairly sort of succinctly without the then need to sort of factor in half an hour for a lunch break.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. Do you think that would cause problems, Dan?
It's more from a personal point of view. I usually pick up children from school, but it's not an issue. Just have to make additional arrangements for. But I'm obviously not the only person in the room who will have that issue.
We can, as I say, it's a proposed that it will be 1 o'clock, but if we need to change that, then we can certainly look to change the times.
Yeah, just looking at the members' briefing, I note that the first, second and third members' briefings are via MS, Microsoft Teams, and then there's one that's in person. Presumably that will be in person at Severn Park or at headquarters. And I'm wondering, the members' briefing is luckily normally relatively short, it's not a great long thing. And I wonder if that would be better being held on Teams as well, to A, save the transportation costs, and B, save a bit of time, because it takes me quite a long time to get to Portishead. The proposal was that members' briefing be held at a fire station, so that we have the opportunity to experience the working fire station for all members. But it's proposed it be the 5th of December, but if it's actually more convenient to choose a different members' briefing date, then we can certainly look to do that.
Perhaps we could look to potentially hold the authority meeting on the 22nd of October at a fire station, and then have the members' briefing directly afterwards with a bit of lunch, maybe.
It was proposed that it be a members' briefing that was on a fire station because of the support that's required for a committee meeting, and the size of the venue that's required for a committee meeting can somewhat make it challenging and perhaps not the optimum use of resources, hence why it's proposed that it be a members' briefing as opposed to a committee meeting that's held on station.
Thanks, Zoe. Okay, well, I think we should just press ahead with this and approve it in principle anyway, with the dates, and then we can all work around venues and times once we've done that. So, unless there's any other questions or comments, I'd like to propose that we approve the schedule of meetings for the municipal year 2026-2027, and seconder. Dan, have you seconded one yet? I don't mind, I'm just trying to share it out, share the glory. Are there any votes against? Any abstentions? And all those in favour? So that agenda item 8 is passed. And we will now move on to agenda item 9, which is the meaty stuff. The 2026-2027 budget setting and precept approval. And Verity will be presenting on this.
Thank you, Chair. There's obviously quite a lot of information in all of my papers today for you, so what I'm going to try to do is just pick out the key points that I want to highlight from each so I'll try not to talk too much. So this first paper is about setting the next financial year's budget and approving the precept. The summary just gives you or confirms that we are only presenting one option within this report. That is something that I mentioned in member briefings in the run-up to the budget setting. We are presenting just a budget option based on an increase in council tax of £5. So that brings our Band D council tax up to £95.43 for 26-27 and is in line with the announced £5 referendum limit for fire and rescue authorities. There are a number of recommendations on this paper, but what I will come back to those at the end, I think. So I'll move on to section 5, which is on page 63 of your bundles and the key considerations. And the first part of this section is all around the funding settlement. So when this paper was published, we had not received the final finance settlement for 26-27 to 28-29. That final settlement was announced on the 9th of February. So has been announced since the publication of these papers. There has been no change for us as a fire authority. So our core spending power remain the same as the provisional settlement. So that doesn't make any changes to the numbers that are presented here today. However, we have not yet received the grants letter. So members might recall if they were here last year, we received it the night before the meeting. We haven't had it at all yet this year. When the final announcement was made, or the final local government finance settlement was announced on Monday, there is indication that it's coming soon. And the indications are that there are three main grants within that. We have a pensions grant and a USAR grant. The indications are they will remain the same, which is what I've assumed. And then there's a protection uplift grant, which there is an indication that that might reduce slightly across the sector. I have made assumptions in the budget based on the numbers and the money that we received in 25-26. If the protection grant does reduce, I don't think it will affect our bottom line because we use reserves to. We have a protection uplift reserve because we've received funding in advance for that in the past that we've not used. So we offset. We never receive as much income as we spend. So we always use the reserve to offset that. And I think it will just mean we use more of the reserve to hold the bottom line. But that's something that I will have to come back and update the committee on when we have received, update the authority on when we have received that letter. The other point I wanted to make in terms of funding announcements is in paragraph 5.4, the business rates reset. So much of or proportion of our funding comes from national non-domestic rates from our unitary authorities. There's been a rates reset for 26-27. It has meant that some of our UAs have found it more difficult to do their NNDR forms because there have been changes. So when I prepared this paper, the numbers in this paper were based on provisional NNDR information because we hadn't had all of the final numbers. I have had all the final numbers now, and a couple of the unitary authorities have pointed out to me that there's a change in the way the Section 31 grant is working. That's something I wasn't aware of previously, and I'm going to have to relook at those assumptions because it previously came from central government and had a multiplier applied to it. Because it's coming via the unitary authorities now, this year, so it seems, I am imagining that multiplier might not happen. So I will relook at those assumptions as well once I've been able to gather a little bit more information about how that funding is going to work. And I think there might be a reduction in our income because of that. But again, I will have to update the committee on that when we have more information. Towards the end of page 63 just confirms a fair funding review that took place. So we have had a slightly different process of funding announcements this year. So it was a multi-year settlement. It covers 3 years rather than a single year. So we've been fortunate in that respect because it gives us a little bit more certainty of what's going to happen in the future. Each year is consulted on separately. So the numbers that are announced for the outer 2 years are provisional until consultations happen in that second and third year. But it does give us a little bit more funding information that we didn't have in the past. The other thing they've done is a fair funding review. So for fire, that meant looking at the fire funding formula, which is a formula that's used to assess the relative needs of each service and then kind of proportionately split the overall allocation between the services. That formula is based on a lot of data that gives indications for things like population and deprivation, coastlines, things like that across all of the country. But it was based on very old information. So the formula has remained the same, but what they have done is reviewed the inputs to that formula, so updated the data. And as a service, we have done quite well out of that. So we have seen quite a significant increase in our revenue support grant as a result of that fair funding review. So if there's a table on page 64 which just shows you, because the funding has been announced slightly differently, we're just trying to compare last year to this year, but it's not exactly the same. But there are two numbers that form the settlement announces, which is the revenue support grant and then the business rates top-up grant. As you can see, that business rates top-up grant remains static, but we have seen a significant increase in our revenue support grant, which is as a result of that fair funding review. I will move on now to the precept, which we've already touched on the fact that we're just presenting one option here on precept, but paragraph 5.9, and particularly the top bullet point at the top of page 65, just confirms that we have got a £5 referendum principle for standalone fire and rescue authorities. So that is the relevant referendum principle for us, and it's been announced as £5 across all 3 years of this finance settlement. And paragraph 5.10 just confirms that there are still some uncertainties around some of that funding. We haven't had the grants letter, and the business rate reset needs to be understood fully. So we will have to come back and update the authority at a subsequent meeting. We do have a meeting in March. So I do plan to bring you a budget update in March, and this is based on the information we have at this point in time. The next section of the paper talks about council tax and the income that we expect to receive through council tax. So you can see we've had a 0.79% increase in tax base across the whole of our service area. We usually, as a budget assumption, assume 0.5%, so that's slightly higher than we would usually assume when we build budget, so that's a positive. And as we move through the paper, there are a number of tables on page 66 and 67, which are tables that we have to complete, and they form part of the statutory calculations that we have to approve today, and there are more detailed there's a more detailed statutory calculation in Appendix 1 for you as well, but the summary is in Table C on page 66, and they are part of the approvals for the meeting today. And they form part of the information that we then send on to the unitary authorities following this meeting based on the level of council tax increase that's approved. We have held a consultation for some of it's part of the Community Risk Management Planning consultation, but we do include some information and questions in there around finances. That consultation closed on Monday. At the point in time that I wrote this paper, I included a summary of the results at that point in time. I have seen the final data summary, and it remains relatively similar to this, so the percentages haven't changed much. So we have seen some positive support from our communities in terms of both agreeing that the service provides value for money. So we had overall 79% either agreeing or strongly agreeing that our service provides value for money. And we also included a question around whether respondents would be supportive of either a £5 increase in precept or a £10 increase in precept. And we did have 60% of respondents willing to pay an additional £10 and then a further 21 willing to pay an additional £5. So across that, we had over 80% of the respondents supportive of an increase in our council tax of at least £5. The next section of the paper talks about locally retained business rates, which comes from the NNDR information provided by unitary authorities. And again, this is based on the provisional information that I had at the time that the papers were published. So will be reviewed based on the final NNDRs that our unitary authorities have now submitted. I won't talk in detail about all of the assumptions that have been made when we built the budget. They are included across page 68 and 69, and I'll assume that they've all been read. But they are consistent with budget assumptions that I discussed as part of the member briefings earlier in the process. The point I will make is that we are still in a deficit position. We are in a much stronger position than we were previously, before the announcement was made, but we are still looking at a circa £800,000 deficit based on the £5 precept, which is why we're not presenting any other option, because any option less than the £5 would increase that deficit. What we have done on page 70, though, is brought to you some information about the work that we're doing to balance that budget. So we're very aware we have a legal responsibility and requirement to balance our budget each year. And at the moment, we've got a budget with a bit of a deficit in there that we need to bridge. So there are some bullet points on page 70 which outline some of the options that we are looking at to try and balance that budget. One of them is placing a challenge on our non-pay budget holders of up to 5%. We did a similar exercise last year, and we did have quite good success rate in terms of the savings that we achieved. I think we have to be mindful of the fact that we are unlikely to achieve the same level of savings again, but it's still an option that we're exploring. We're reviewing the capital programme, and as we come to later on in this agenda, we'll see the capital programme is a significant significant capital programme, and it puts a significant amount of pressure on our revenue budget in terms of cost of financing that. So we're looking at whether there's opportunities to rationalise that capital programme, potentially reduce or delay spend. And the option we've included there is the Western Fire Station. There's a feasibility study ongoing at the moment, which will hopefully help us to dictate what's the right timing and the right scope of the project that's associated with that station. There's also some points there around crewing and training reviews to try and make sure that we're using our resources as efficiently as possible, and hopefully that then helps us to reduce the need to pull on overtime, which will then reduce our costs. Green Book vacancy management, so again, it's all about just making sure that when we replace positions, that we are doing that with the best value in mind. So we're always making sure that we're replacing things with the right option. We're looking at the right options to replace. And then there's also a Green Book review and a governance review, which will help us to make sure that we're using our resources as efficiently, as effectively as possible. So paragraph 5.29 then just confirms that we will bring updated plans back to the Fire Authority meeting. There's a July meeting that's been agreed as part of the previous paper, so it's likely that that will come back to the July meeting, but we do have a March Fire Authority meeting, which I will come and update you with any changes in funding assumptions and any other changes that we have been able to make, or any deficits that we've been able to bridge as part of that, but I think we'll be bringing you a final update on that in July as well. The final section of my paper is a Section 25 statement. It's something that's a legal requirement that I have to do as the Statutory Finance Officer, so I have to give you, as an authority, assurances over both the robustness of the budget and also the adequacy of the level of reserve. So there are some paragraphs included within this section that confirm that I'm happy with both the robustness of the data based on the information we have at this point in time, and as I've said, we know that there are some uncertainties there that we will need to re-look at, and also the adequacy of the level of reserves. Now, reserves are something that we can only use we can only use them once, and they can only be used, or they should only be used, for short-term kind of project-based pieces of work, not for funding ongoing kind of services ongoing costs in the service. So we need to make sure that we're using those reserves in the right way. And the final statement here says that I'm happy that we are using the reserves properly for 26-27. But what I do raise in paragraph 5.40 is just that level of reserves is reducing. So it's increasingly important that we're managing those reserves effectively and that we hold those adequate reserves. And given that we're expecting deficits, and we'll see when we come on to the medium-term financial plan paper, we're expecting deficits across that medium-term financial plan, it's unlikely that we're going to have sufficient revenue surpluses to top our reserves back up. So we have to just be really mindful about how we use them. We do have earmarked reserves, and they are within our gift to use them as we see fit, so we can choose to allocate them to projects based on priority. And at the moment, we are just using reserves for two main priorities for next year, which is detailed in this paper. So this statement confirms that I'm happy with the robustness of the assumptions, also happy with the fact that we're not placing unsustainable reliance on our reserves for 26-27. And I'll go back now to the beginning of the paper, which is the recommendations, because there are quite a few, and it's all just around the statutory bits of information that we have to approve as part of the precept. So if I move back to page 61, the Fire Authority is asked to A, consider and scrutinise the information contained in this report. B, approve the proposed £5 increase in Band D council tax level, increasing council tax for a Band D property to £95.43. C, you are asked to approve the 26-27 revenue budget, shown in Appendix 2, based on the £5 precept increase, noting the provisional funding information used and the resultant efficiencies required to balance the budget, and subject to an update on these efficiencies being brought back to the Fire Authority at the July meeting. It just notes that the date was subject to approval of the paper that we've just seen. Recommendation D is to make the statutory determinations set out in Appendix 1 based upon the information contained in this report. A summary of these determinations and the council tax information are included in paragraph 5.14 and table C of this report. Recommendation E is to agree that the precepts be issued to the unitary authorities in the Avon Fire Authority area in proportion to the tax base determined by them as detailed in Table 5, paragraph 5.15 of this report. And then the final recommendation, recommendation F, is to note the amount of council tax for 26-27 for the properties in each tax band as per Table E, in paragraph 5.16 of this report. And then it says the Statutory Finance Officer will forward the precept details to the unitary authorities as the billing authorities following this meeting. So the key thing we need to do today is approve a level of precept to make sure that our unitary authorities are aware so that they can continue to set their budgets. I think that was all I was going to say on that paper, but then happy to open up for questions.
Raj, and then Robin, and then Paul, and then David.
Thank
And then
you,
Richard.
Chair. First, I think I would say thanks, Verity. It's a wonderful presentation. And your report is very self-explanatory. But I would like to have some few assurances from you. On the start, we say an increase in tax, council tax of £5 from 90.43 to 95.43. I look upon your figures on your report and all that. On the other side, I look upon my residents who has sent me to represent her for themselves. I just feel, your figure work is based upon £5 increase in a budget. Can't it be £4? Can't it be more innovative? Or is it, we will just lose it, So I'm just thinking of, is there a lack of innovation on that point? I mean, I don't say that, but technically I agree with you because I got no hesitation in approving the £5. Because I can see your work. Because I'm on a police as well from this first same job over there as well. I can find a fault with them, but it's very difficult for me to find a fault with the fire authority. So I'm in favor of you on that account. But still, I think that can some way we can help our residents, by reducing. That's the first question. And the second question is about this grant business, when on 5.2 or 5.3. So it means that all your figure work is up in the air, depending upon that, what we're going to get in a grant letter. And I don't think we're going to get positive. It's always negative. From experience, I don't think they will give you more money on that. But I just want to establish, is there a buffer zone? So you have to absorb that shock if there is a shortfall in that? That's the second question.
Okay.
And it's only a couple more questions. For the business rates, I know most of the small business rates, they are given relief from the business these days for 5-6 years post-COVID period. I mean, that will stretch. I think probably the central government is funding that part of the business rates, which you receive part of that. But is there any other way this shortfall has been funded, or apart from the grant, or is there anything else to cover that? Because I think sooner or later, all the businesses will be subjected to the business rates sooner or later. But before that happens, is there any other arrangements apart from if there is shortfall of that? One thing, and the last thing is about the survey thing, which there is a, if you just see on, there's a mention of that survey. That survey sample is very little, I think. Can't we base our conclusions on based of the survey? That's not a participation of majority of the people, I think. It's only a few people who participated in that. Do you put much weightage on that survey? Thank you. That's my questions only.
Thank you. I'll try and remember them. I might have to come back.
No.
So the first question around the £5. So the £5, it's a referendum principle. So we cannot go above the £5 unless we hold a referendum. For us to do that, we'd have to hold a referendum across all 4 unitary authorities, which is quite costly, and you run the risk of it not being approved. And then you've still only got the £5 and you've spent more money trying to get more. We can do less, but obviously it means a lower, a larger deficit, so less income, more deficit. We have in the past presented multiple options around the precept. So we've presented an option of, say, a 3% increase, because in the past we used to have a 2.99% referendum limit, so we would present 2.99% or £5 are the options we presented last year. But for this year, I just felt it wasn't worth presenting an option that was worse than the £5. So that's the logic on that one.
How much the £5 works out per day or per?
It's minimal. I want to say 10, 11, 12 sort of pence a day, something like that. I don't know exactly, but it's minimal. It is minimal. Second question, I might have to come back to you and remind me.
That's about have you got...
The grants letter and the uncertainty. So I haven't built in any growth in those grants. And the preliminary kind of information that we've had is that 2 of the 3, and they're the larger 2, are going to stay the same. The third one is the one that might reduce, but as I've said, we have got reserves to help with that. So I don't think it will have an impact for us for 26-27. There's a risk that they will start tailing those grants off, and longer term, there will be a larger impact. Unfortunately, those grants don't form part of core spending power, so they're not part of that 3-year settlement or anything like that, so we don't have any longer term visibility over them. So I don't have much of a contingency plan for future years, but for 26-27, based on the provision information we've had, I think we will be the numbers, the final numbers will be close to what we've built in here. Third question was something with the business rates, wasn't it? I don't claim to be any expert in terms of business rate income. I know that we just receive a proportion of an amount from the unitary authorities, and I've just been told that that's changing. We haven't received much direct communication. I've only had that from unitary authorities, so my information is relatively limited. But I think your question was around whether we have a buffer for that, and I think the answer is no. In the long term, no, we don't have a buffer. We don't have much of a reserve position now to fall back on, and we don't have significant levels of revenue funding to start building those back up. Yes, I mean, you are right. It's a relatively small sample, but that's all we have. But your question was around whether we place a lot of weight on it. I mean, we don't place lots of weight on it, and actually the fire authority are here to approve the precept, not our communities. But I suppose it helps to give you a little bit of a feel for the support and where the people that have responded, where they sit on that question.
Thank you, and thank you, Verity, for your work and your team's work in presenting this with fairly late information and some not arrived at all. I just wanted to ask a question about the paragraphs 511 and 517, which is about the council tax base and so therefore the precepts. I know there were some questions about how government has been working out figures, certainly around the fair funding formula, has been basing those figures on 100% collection rates. Now, haven't got 100% collection rates. Apologies if I can't see the reference in here, but if correct collection rates are less than 100%, which they will be, do those numbers go down, or is that absorbed by the unitaries who have responsibility for collection? That's the first question.
Okay.
I'll let you do that first.
We do build in assumptions on collection fund surplus and deficits, and we do build in assumptions on bad debt, which actually links back to an audit recommendation around challenging the bad debt. So we do build in assumptions on those. If they were different to the assumptions we've built, there could be a risk there.
Okay. Right. Thank you. The other one was...
Clarify.
Yeah.
So the figures for the tax base, that is what we will collect this year. It won't change. The collection fund adjustments are made in arrears. So we might see an impact going forward, but the figures that we're presenting take into account the collection fund adjustment for this year that we've received, which will actually be for last year. But
fine.
So those figures, the tax base figures, won't change for 26-27, and any non-collection will be adjusted through collection funds going forward.
So that will be picked up in 27-28
for this year.
And driving in here, looks like the tax base is going to go up slightly, certainly in South Gloss. So yeah,
but those tax base figures are what we'll base this year's collection on.
Okay, thank you. The other, and it's following on a little bit from Raj's comments about consultation. Consultation is consultation. Certainly 560 responses across the three unitaries kind of fits in with the 79 responses that we had in Bath and North East Somerset. And the numbers are as they are. I have to say my interpretation was it's the first consultations that I've seen where an overwhelming majority of people have voted for an increase, and actually 60% of people have voted for a £10 increase. And there are fire and rescue authorities where their precept numbers have gone higher than £5, and that's where they have got combined authority mayors. And I'm not aware of public outcry about where those increases have actually taken place, not proposed taken place. So I'm quite surprised with those numbers. I'm tentatively pleased about the numbers, and I think it'll be part of a discussion I want to bring up in the next report, the medium-term financial plan, of what that means for us as a fire and rescue service into the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, councillors. And just to answer the question from yourself, in terms of it works out to be £2 per day per household for the average band D. That's on the £5 increase, and then it's £3 per day for the £10 increase. So, and we articulated that in the consultation just to kind of put the context of the ask. We do recognise that any increase for local taxation has an impact on people, so we are very mindful of that impact to local people. But you know, when we articulate in terms of what it works out to be per household, we feel that it was a moderate increase to the maximum of the referendum limit. Whilst at the same time we've also been engaging both locally and nationally with government for additional investment, which you've seen within the papers we've been supported. So we haven't just looked at local taxation, we've also looked at support from the government, which thankfully we've received. And my thanks to all members for the work that's been done across the last year to support us in that endeavour. So my thanks.
Thanks, Chief. Robin, was that it? Thank you. Okay, Paul.
Chair, thank you. I just want to start off by also congratulating Verity and everybody for this report. I just wanted to ask a governance question. There's a statutory requirement for the Fire Authority to have a balanced budget moving forward, but if the government figures aren't there at the moment, and in terms of the risk, you've said, well, we can deal with that later, but then are we then actually achieving the statutory requirement by the end of March? And under those circumstances, should we be considering the report back around the latest finance in March rather than July? That's my first question.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and I think we had a similar conversation this time last year because we had deficits when we were setting the budget. We have to have an approved budget by the beginning of the financial year, so we have to have approved something before the end of March. And you're right, we do have to balance our budget, but we are able to balance that budget as we move through the year. So whilst we can't give you a confirmed route path at this point in time, hopefully we can give you an update in March. I'm just not promising that we'll be able to give you a full update at that point because we need to give our budget holders and other people time to kind of work through those options, and then for us in finance to work out where that leaves us. But as we move through the year, we will continue to monitor that to make sure that we do balance the budget by the time we come to the year end.
Yeah, that's a practical issue. I was asking the governance question about whether that then satisfies the legislation.
I believe it does, but we can take that away and double check.
Thank you. The second one was around consultation.
Sorry, just to add to that. It is common practice within public sector to include unidentified savings to balance the budget. So it is still a balanced budget, that's what we're presenting today. And there is no requirement to identify those savings when that budget is set. They need to be identified obviously as the year goes on, but like I said, across the public sector, you will see budgets approved with unidentified savings within them.
Right, sorry, my colleague on the left is making comments. On the consultation, we were asked last night at our budget making by the councillor on my left there about the consultation being low, and the answer to that was very simply that it's not controversial to the public. And I think that is really, if there was something really awful, you would have a lot more consultation. So I'm not the least bit worried about that. And then going through the list of the potential savings, I think reading it, the frontline services are in effect protected by what we're suggesting. And I think we should all feel really proud of that, because I think it's something that we've worked with the Chief Fire Officer to try and make sure that happens. And I think we should actually record that fact that it's going to have minimal effect at the front line, and certainly not in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency. We've seen in other fire authority areas where they're in a much worse situation than we are. And I think it's really great we're having this conversation today, and it's so positive. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, I mean, some of the other services are not in the position we're in. We're not in root health, but we're in health, which is why I know that the FPU, I think they balloted this week to talk about industrial action, which may well affect us as well, despite the fact that we're not making any cuts to frontline services. So next I have David.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Verity, for your report. I'd like to draw attention to, on page 70, paragraph 5.28, and there's a discussion about the crew and training review that is happening. So I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we've not had to cut our frontline services as a result of the fair funding review, and we've not had to adjust our crewing rates for Type B appliances, etc. I would like an assurance that we do have an adequate pipeline of trainee fire personnel to make sure that we don't have to make crewing cuts as a result of not having or having too many fire people retire, and making sure that there's enough people to actually supply the pumps, please.
Rich?
Yeah, good question, David. Just to reassure you, really, the crewing and training review, the main reason behind that is looking at, in the past, what we've done is we organise our training for the year, and then we crew according to that training. And the result of that has been that we end up with appliances unavailable unnecessarily sometimes. So really, to put it in a sort of short way, what we're doing is we're reversing that. See how do we crew our fire engines to make sure that the most amount of fire is available most amount of time, and then fit our training around that. As far as the firefighters' vacancies for retirements, we've got a training school starting in early March of 16 people, and I think we're planning the same, more or less the same for September. So it will greatly increase our establishment figures. And with that, alongside the crew and training review, will mean that we will have more fire engines available more of the time. And if anything, it will greatly increase our establishment.
And Rich, we haven't been able to do these training courses for a while, have we?
No, that's right, yeah. So we are in a much better place as far as that's concerned. And it's good for the organisation, it's good for the culture of new people joining the service. And the big worry we had around the pension remedy, which was our worry that actually we might have a bit of a mass exodus of people leave, well, that's kind of coming to the tail end of that now, and we haven't seen that impact. So whilst I think it was good to recognise that risk and have a plan B for it, that risk has never materialised, not to the extent it could have done.
That's excellent, thank you.
Richard. Oh, blimey, that was loud.
My comments, they are comments, not question. I hope that's okay, Chairman. At the risk of me tooism, my thanks to Verity and her team. A lot of work's been done, and I do appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Has me helped by the fact you haven't received the grant letters, as you said. Every council which has a housing revenue account, we're expecting a statement on rent convergence and the financial impact in October of last year. We're still waiting that. So I do hope the grant letters come through quicker even. With regard to the efficiency savings, obviously those need to be progressed for this year and for future. The chairman, common with myself, finishes his 8 years in the summer, so we won't be there, but my best wishes for members and officers, because some difficult decisions will have to be made. In common with Robin, I do think the admittedly limited consultation feedback is really positive, and clearly people in the greater Avon area do appreciate, as we have long known, actually, that the public safety and actually of the fire service is the number one issue. And even in the present cost of living crisis, people seem to be prepared to dig into their pocket. So although I'm not generally in favour of the hikes in taxation, I think the 5% band D, £5 band D escalation is supportable and it has my full support.
Thank you, Richard. Onka, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Verity. So, just a question about what proportion of the total budget is spent on frontline response versus operational staff? So that's the first question.
I mean, staff costs, I don't know the exact percentages without working them out, but staff costs make up about 80%, I'm looking at Claire, 80% of our overall costs, and operational staff form the vast majority of that 80%. So around 75% of our staff costs are then on operational staff.
Thank you. And how sustainable is the current reliance on reserve beyond the 4-year plan?
When we come to the MTFP paper, you'll see that we are only planning on using our reserves in the first year. So we've got around £1 million of reserves assumed in 26-27 to be released, and that's mostly in relation to offsetting implementation costs associated with the mobilising contract, as well as some of the protection uplift grant funding that I talked about. When we look at the outer 3 years of the medium-term financial plan, I'm not assuming any reserves are used. That might not happen in reality, but that will depend on the highest priority projects and programmes at that point in time. So I think it's the most prudent assumption to make is that we're not using those reserves for those outer 3 years. So it means those reserves are assumed to stay relatively static on those outer 3 years. We could dip into them, but we're not assuming it. So we're not kind of placing reliance on them in those future years.
Thank you. Matthew.
Thank you very much, and well done, everyone, for getting us into a very good position, I think. I'm just looking at page 69, and the bullet points in the middle there, the white bullet points, as it were. It says that pay awards are assumed at 3%. So my first question is, what happens if pay awards are higher than that, given that inflation is currently higher than 3%? And second, is there a slight typo in the brackets there? But it talks about, in effect, two different or two types of green book. Thank you.
Yes, you're right, there is a typo there. It should say July 2026 for grey book.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, apologies.
That's okay.
And then your question around what happens if pay awards are higher than 3%. I mean, it's a good one and it's a risk, and we've had that as kind of a risk over the years that I've been here. What we have done this year, and it's that last white bullet point, is built in a little bit of a contingency across all employee costs for a potential increase in pay awards more than 3%. So, but it's not only to cover that. We don't know yet whether employer contributions are going to increase for the firefighter pension scheme, and it also might give us a little bit of resilience if we need to bring additional roles into the service. So we have tried to build in a little bit of contingency within our employment costs just to help bridge that gap. But I mean, a 1% pay rise across all of our staff equates to around £500,000. So it would put, quite a significant pressure on our revenue budget if we were to have a higher pay award than the 3% we've assumed. The 3% is something that, as a sector, the vast majority of services are forecasting, but in the acknowledgement that there is a risk there that it could be higher.
We seem to have exhausted the questions, but Paul?
A very quick one, Chair. With regards to the £5, Richard's really positive comments. I'm going to be fully supporting that, because if the government says £5 and then you don't go to that figure, next year you're in trouble, worse trouble. So being practical about it in the same way as the 5% in local authorities, if you don't take what's allowed, then you're then at a disadvantage in subsequent years. So very clearly I'll be supporting the £5.
Thank you. I think it's peanuts and you get better than monkeys. So there you go. No, I couldn't possibly say that, Paul. Okay, any other questions we have on this? Okay, if you give me a second, I just want to clarify how we're going to take this vote. I just wanted to make sure. We'll take all the recommendations as one. If that's okay, does anybody have any problems with that? No? Good, 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 good. Okay, so here we go.
Propose and second.
Yeah, I'm going to read them out.
Okay.
Yep. So we're asked to consider and scrutinise the information contained in this report. We are asked to approve the proposed £5 increase in Band D council tax level, increasing council tax for a Band D property to 95.43. We are asked to approve the 2026-27 revenue budget, Appendix 2, based on the £5 precept increase, noting the provisional funding information used and resultant efficiencies required to balance the budget and subject to an update on these efficiencies being brought back to the authority at the July meeting, date subject to approval by the authority, as we've done before on item 8, I think it was, as part of the proposed dates. We are asked to make the statutory determinations which are set out in Appendix 1 based upon the information contained in this report. A summary of these determinations and the council tax information are included in paragraph 5.14 and table C of this report. We are asked to agree that precepts be issued to the unitary authorities in the Avon Fire Authority area in proportion to the tax base determined by them as detailed in table D, paragraph 5.15 of this report. And finally, we are asked to note the amount of council tax for 2026-27 for properties in each tax band as per Table E, paragraph 5.16 of this report. The Statutory Finance Officer will forward precept details to the unitary authorities as the billing authorities following this meeting. So I'd like to propose that we do all of that. Can I have a seconder? Richard? Thank you. Are there any votes against? Are there?
Chair, can I just ask, as it's a budget vote, shouldn't it be a named vote, or isn't that within the constitution? I thought governance-wise it. No? Okay.
I don't recall us having name votes before, but no, there's no requirement.
In that case, that's just local requirements by different authorities. I thought it was a statutory governance issue. But thank you.
Yeah, I think when we had the votes at the budget meeting yesterday, they were e-votes, so they were named votes. But I think we're okay here. Matthew.
To say, I think when the local council, our local councils, actually set the council tax, then we do have a name vote, but we didn't actually on the budget for our council. Thank you.
I'm hoping it's going to be unanimous anyway, which means we'll all get to put our names to it. So, you okay? Brilliant. Okay, so the proposal's out there. Richard has seconded. Any votes against? Any abstentions? And all those in favour? Yeah. So that is unanimous. Thank you very much. That's agenda item 9. Kieran, yeah, no problems, mate. Moving on to agenda item 10, which is the medium-term financial plan, 4 years. And again, Verity will be presenting on this one.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, so this is paper 10, starting on page 83 of your bundles. And this presents to you the 4-year medium-term financial plan. So it's based heavily on the 26-27 revenue budget that we have just approved, but then extrapolates that information out for a further 3 years. There is only one recommendation of this paper, which is to approve the 4-year medium-term financial plan as detailed in this report and the appendices. I'll move on to section 5, I think, and just go through the high-level kind of assumptions and how we've built the medium-term financial plan. So, in terms of funding, again, when this paper was written, we had the provisional settlement, and it carries the same caveats around funding assumptions that we still don't have at this point in time. So any changes that we make to 26-27 as a result of final funding will likely then transfer through into the outer years of the medium-term financial plan. Because if you look at the assumptions that we make in terms of funding in Table 1, at the top of page 85, you can see the council tax precept, £5 for the first 3 years. That's part of that settlement that's been announced. The outer year we're assuming remains, we get a £5 again for that 4th year, but that's an uncertainty at this point in time. They're all still subject to consultation as well. The council tax base, if not provided by the unitary authority, so some of our unitary authorities do give us forecast tax base increases across the 4 years. If they don't, we just I've just built in a 0.5% increase for those. The revenue support grant, you can see quite significant movements for the first 3 years. Again, that's in line with the fair funding review. But the outer year, I've dropped back down to a 3% increase, which is low, but is in line with the kind of increases we saw in the past, so in link to inflation. So I've dropped back down and assumed that once this fair funding review is done, they might go back to a similar way of inflating that, just to be prudent. And then we assume no increase to locally retained non-domestic rates, which is, again, similar to what we see in reality. Anything else is assumed to stay the same as 26-27. So if there are any changes to any of the NNDR information that we've had or the grants, we will have to consider how that impacts in the outer 3 years as well. The bottom of page 85 shows a summary of the costs and the assumptions we've made in terms of building the cost side of the 4-year plan. There is one correction to that table. The first year, 26-27, it says that pay cost inflation has been assumed at 4%. It is 3%, not 4%. And the paragraph following that table at the top of page 86 confirms that. It's just a typo in the table. So just for the minutes to correct that. But it confirms we're assuming 3% across all 4 years of the medium-term financial plan, and we're assuming around 3% inflation each year as well. I know that the target is to drop inflation back down to 2%. It doesn't seem to be that we ever get there, so we've kind of gone for slightly higher than that. We also work on the assumption with some of the non-pay costs that we have a procurement team that work really hard to kind of keep those under control. So whilst we do have some inflationary increases, we're also constantly going out to tender to try to ensure that we are getting best value for money. There is a section then on non-pay budgets and some of the assumptions we've made. So we apply a general inflation to non-pay budgets, which we've seen in that table of 3% for the outer 4 years. The words in this section also just confirm that we look at any other known changes. So, for example, the mobilising implementation is happening over the next couple of years, and those costs fluctuate year on year. So rather than just inflating, we are looking at what those costs are actually contractually expected to be based on milestones and making sure that we reflect that accurately. As we mentioned in the previous paper, we're not assuming to use reserves for years 2 to 4 of the medium-term financial plan. We are continuing with the same assumptions in terms of capital financing costs, so a 4.6% interest rate, and then there's an MRP provision in there as well, which is linked to the life of the asset. That all remains the same as the assumptions that we built into the first year of the plan. Paragraph 5.13 just confirms that savings are needed every year of the medium-term financial plan in order to balance each individual year. That is consistent with prior years, but we are in a much better position that these numbers are much smaller. So whilst we still have deficits because of the fair funding review and the additional funding we've seen, they are a lot smaller than previously predicted. So as we talked about in the previous paper, we're in the rounds of looking at efficiencies and making sure that we're using our resources in the best way possible. But we're not at this point in time looking at cuts, which is a positive place to be, but there is still work to do, as we acknowledge. There is still work to do to make sure that we can balance that budget. Paragraph 5.14 just talks about the PFI arrangement. So across or during the period of the medium-term financial plan, that PFI arrangement comes to an end. It comes to an end at the end of March 28. At the moment, we're not certain how and what it looks like in terms of costs to run Severn Park as a training facility and a headquarters. So what we've done is assumed that the current costs associated with the PFI arrangement and the headquarters lease we have in Portishead continue in the last 2 years of the plan, so that we have got a cost provision in there, and we will have to continue to review whether that is at the right level. But at the moment, we don't have any information to kind of reflect anything more accurately. Then a section 6 is all around the risks. So really, these risks are all around where our assumptions may be where it may be that changes happen in comparison to our assumptions that put us in a worse off position. So if our inflation assumptions aren't high enough, if our pay awards aren't high enough, or if any funding is lower. As we've said in the revenue budget paper, because we think, or we haven't had certainty over all of our funding for 26-27, when we bring back an update to the authority in March, I will bring an update that looks at the full 4 years, so you can see the impact of any funding confirmations in 26-27 and how that has impacted out to 3 years as well. I think that was all I was going to say, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Verity. Robin? Paul?
Thank you, Verity, again for the report. It's difficult, isn't it, looking through the glass darkly at how it's going to look in 2, 3, 4 years' time. I mean, I certainly, looking at your working table 1 on the council tax base and revenue support grant, I think you're rightly cautious. I think the figures for the tax base are likely to rise more than that. But then again, if those figures rise, that's because there's more people and there's more need for a service. And I suppose this is as much a question for the next report on a capital base as it is for this report, but I think it is relevant. Because there are large-scale developments going on, because there will be an increased demand on the service, are we looking to what capital revenue can be gained through Section 106s, and I'm assuming we can do Section 106s, which will make a difference to the revenue outturns because it could be less borrowing and less capital expenditure on that. The other bit, and I appreciate that might not be an answer you can give straight away. The other bit, I think, in the medium-term financial plan is, of course, that North Somerset started consulting in the last day or so about joining in with the West of England Combined Authority. If that is successful, then we have coterminous boundaries between the fire and rescue and the Combined Authority. The direction of travel from central government is about devolving responsibilities for fire, for health, and for the police. And this is probably one of the few examples nationally of coterminous boundaries that work. So it appears to me it could well be low-hanging fruit in terms of devolving that responsibility. And if so, then the discussion we just had about £5 increases onto the precept, that limit actually disappears because, of course, combined authorities can raise higher than that. So I think it's a little bit of a wecker hole in the medium-term financial plan, but I think it's, if not definite, I would say it's more likely than not that will be something that will come in the next few years.
And also, Robin, there's the question of governance. Will there be a fire authority?
Yes.
The mayor.
Although isn't the governance issue with police is just going to the House of Lords at the moment, I think, and isn't there some knock-on effects on blue light services for that particular discussion? But yeah.
Well, I'm... Yeah, okay. So I'll go to your first comment or question around Section 106, grant funding and kind of capital programme. I don't know the details of any kind of Section 106 opportunities off the top of my head right now, but I know that it's something that our premises team look at as part of the work that they do in the investments that we make across the service. And you're right, it's something that is relevant for this paper and the next paper. We are looking all the time at whether there are funding opportunities for our capital programme. So could we reduce our borrowing and therefore reduce the pressure that we're putting on the medium-term financial plan? There is no capital funding, and there hasn't been for some time specifically for the sector, but it's something that we continue to lobby for. But we're also looking at and we have had in the past things like decarbonisation grant funding. So if we're doing a specific project that it might only attract a small amount of grant funding, but something that might be relevant, we're aware that other services are looking at that as well, and we're linking with other services to see what opportunities they've identified and if any of them are relevant for us. And something in the capital paper around clean air zone compliance, and there's some funding that Bristol City Council have got that we think some might be available to us to offset some of our fleet investment costs over the next 3 years. All of these things aren't certain, but they're things that we're exploring, and then you're right, will help to bridge that gap in the future, hopefully. And then I don't know if Matt wanted to pick up on the WECA comments.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, as officers, we would work under any governance model that is democratically decided. So that would be a decision for members and Avon Fire Authority and the Mayor of WECA, and obviously driven by the government. Obviously, I am aware that if there is coterminosity, it's quite specific within the white paper that where that sits with the fire service, it will fall under the strategic authority. That's the specific wording. So again, as officers, we wouldn't make a view on that. We would be led by the decision of the fire authority and the mayor. If, however, members are asking us as officers to go away and do a piece of work on what that would look like, that's something that we could certainly progress forwards in terms of reviewing the LGR and what that might mean for coterminosity if and when North Somerset was to come under the WECA footprint.
Paul.
Chair, thank you. Can I just ask, there was a decision taken by the Fire Authority to move to Sevenside headquarters. It's quite clear there's a few figures up in the air about that. Could we just have an assurance that if that decision is affected by the finances, that we would have a report back to the Fire Authority if anything changes? Because I think there is a question mark over that in terms of the medium-term financial planning. And in particular, I think that would there not be savings in terms of the money that we're paying out at the moment to use the police headquarters? So is that factored into the calculations?
At the moment, we pay around £1 million a year for the PFI arrangement, and we pay between 2 and 300k a year for our HQ site. So we've got around £1.3 million of cost that we have held within the outer 2 years of this medium-term financial plan, assuming that it will cost us around that to run Severn Park as our own training and headquarters. So we haven't factored in any savings, but we haven't factored in any growth either, really, apart from an inflationary factor. So you're right, there is a risk there, but there could be an opportunity. I mean, the costs, PRC get regular updates on the move to Severn Park. The costs are part of the plan in terms of the stages of the plan. The costs are upcoming but haven't yet been reviewed. So I think we need to understand first the needs of the sites, if that makes sense, before we can then work out how much that costs to run. But absolutely, updates will be brought back to the authority.
Thank you, Verity. And thank you for your question. And I probably can't add much more on the finances than what Verity's told you, but it's really to give you some assurance around the governance in place. So we take regular reports to our service leadership team. We also have a paper that goes to PRC regularly now as well. We are monitoring the situation. We are linked in with NISTA, who support us. We are linked in with Severn Park. And we do have escalation routes in place should there be an issue, so we could notify you at the earliest opportunity. Believe it is in March. We've got a session at Severn Park, and you are all invited to please join us so we can show you around the site and give you further information on what we're doing and our approach to it at the moment.
Obviously, members in the past have had the opportunity to visit Severn Park and watch the full-time graduation demonstrations and so forth, but I'm aware that some of our newer members haven't, as we haven't had the recruitment, haven't been able to do that. So hopefully, now that we are going to be running training schools, you'll all be able to do that. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, the recommendations are a lot more straightforward on this one. We are asked to approve the 4-year medium-term financial plan as detailed in this report and its appendices. So I'd like to propose that we do so. Will I have a seconder, please? Who haven't? Have you had one yet, David? I shall give it to you. I shall give it to you. I'll use my magnanimous powers. So, do we have any votes against? Do we have any abstentions? And all those in favour? Thank you very much, all. So, we now move on to agenda item 11, which is the capital programme and strategy. And just for a change, it's going to be Verity on this one.
Thank you. So starting on page 91 of your bundles is the capital programme and strategy. So this paper brings to you a capital strategy for the coming 3 financial years. I don't know what that noise is. And a capital programme covering the same 3-year period. The capital strategy is a document that we use to kind of determine our approach to capital investment, ensuring it's aligned with our corporate priorities, and it gives kind of an overview of how our capital expenditure and our financing will contribute to deliver our outcomes. The capital strategy is included at Appendix 1 of your bundles. I'm not going to go through the strategy in lots of detail. It remains relatively unchanged compared to previous years, so there's not significant change there, but it has just been updated to reflect our current kind of financial position. If I move on to section 4 of the cover paper and on page 92, this just gives you a summary of the 3-year capital programme in terms of total spend. So the total spend that we are including within the proposed 3-year programme is just over £38.5 million, so it's not an insignificant amount of money for us as a service. And the second part of that table, which is in the top of page 93, just confirms how that's going to be funded, or how we expect it is going to be funded over the next 3 years. So we've got a really minimal allocation there for capital receipts. That's for kind of the sale or disposal of any assets. We're not assuming that we're going to get great funding from that, but any income we receive from capital disposals must go back into funding capital investment. So usually that's in the form of kind of fleet disposals where we get small amounts of capital receipts. We are assuming we're going to have no capital reserves left. Our capital reserves are expected to be fully used by the end of 25-26, which means going into 26-27 we have none left to draw on. The other potential opportunity to fund in capital investment is to use some of your revenue budget funding. But as we've seen when we've looked at the revenue budget and across the medium-term financial plan, we don't have any spare revenue funding to put towards the capital programme. So there's no assumption that any funding is going to come from there. If we did have surpluses at any point in time, if something changed and we had surpluses, we would consider directing them towards our capital investment to reduce that borrowing. So at the moment we are forecasting our external borrowing to increase by just under £38.5 million over the next 3 years to fund this capital programme. We have just seen the medium-term financial plan, which has got deficits, and some of those deficits, or a lot of that deficit position, is driven by increasing capital financing costs. So this capital programme does put pressure on our revenue budget. We are making an assumption over the interest rate, so 4.6% on any new borrowing, and also an amount that we have to put called minimum revenue provision, which is like allocating an amount for the capital repayment at the end of any loan, and that's linked to the life of the asset. So there's not one approach to that. It varies across depending on what the assets are, but it is putting significant pressure on our revenue budget. Having said that, if we move on to paragraph 5.4 on page 94. The capital programme isn't significantly different from the previous capital programme. So it is a significant amount of money, but it's not significantly different from what was previously approved. So the large projects within it do still remain the same. And the bullet points on paragraph 5.4 just talk through some of those key movements, but actually overall we're only looking at around £500,000 more capital programme for the next 3 years compared to what we approved this time last year. The next section of the report talks about the details of the capital investment plans across various areas of the service. I won't go through them in significant detail because they're all there for you, but I will just pick out that the premises element of the capital programme is the most significant. It's over 75% of that £38 million spend is on the premises budget, and that mainly is in relation to both the Bath rebuild, which is underway at the moment, and the Western redevelopment. And I have highlighted, as part of the comments around the Western refurbishment, that there's a feasibility study ongoing And it's something that we mentioned in the revenue budget paper as well. That feasibility study will help direct the timing and the scope of that project. So it may be that that's an opportunity for us to look at rephasing spend there. If I move on, the fleet capital programme, again, I won't go through it in detail, but there's detail in there in the paper around all of the different investments that are planned over the next 3 years in terms of the fleet. But what I will pick out is the very last bullet point on page 97, which is paragraph 5.18, and it links to a conversation we had earlier around grant funding and the CAS, so clean air compliance funding that we think is available through Bristol City Council. So we're having conversations at the moment to see if we can get some additional funding to support some of the conversion and the purchases of new fleet items that will be clean air zone compliant. We haven't assumed that we're going to get that funding, so any funding that we do receive will be a positive and will offset some of the borrowing that we have to make, and then in turn reduce some of the pressure we see on the revenue budget. If I move on to the prudential borrowing and capital financing cost section of the paper, which starts on page 98, this just again reiterates the fact that the first paragraph there, 5.23, just reiterates that our reserves are expected to be gone by the end of 25-26, so we've got no capital reserves to fund the programme, and therefore the majority of this programme is going to be funded through borrowing. Paragraph 5.25 just confirms that under the Prudential Code, which is the SIPFA guidance, that we are allowed to borrow to fund our capital programme, so and that is our intention to do so. There's a heavy link here between the next paper that we'll see, the Treasury Management paper, and in that paper we will present to you all of the indicators, and a lot of those indicators are driven by the capital programme and the investment plans that we have. But in this section I've just picked out some of the ones that are more relevant here around the debt limit. So when we set the capital programme, and then we are required to set some prudential indicators which help us to manage our capital programme and to ensure that it's affordable and sustainable. We have to set two limits on our debt. So one is an operational boundary, which is the limit beyond which we do not normally expect capital expenditure to exceed, our debt level to exceed. And it's normally linked to a capital financing requirement, which is basically our underlying need to borrow. So our underlying need to borrow, or our capital financing requirement, is increasing over the next 3 years because of the increasing spend and the fact that we don't really have anywhere else to fund it from. We don't have any internal options, and so that need to borrow is growing. So our operational boundary is growing across the 3-year period. And then we set an authorised limit for external debt. So that's the debt limit that we cannot legally exceed. We add a buffer on top of the operational limit of £1 million to that. So our operational limit is what we don't expect to exceed. We give ourselves £1 million buffer and say legally we cannot exceed that authorised limit. What we've done, which is slightly different this year, is we've set our authorised and our operational boundaries based on the maximum that we think they're going to be for the 3 years, and we've set them at that limit for all 3 years. Normally in the past I've let them grow. But since we've appointed Treasury Management Advisors, which is something we'll touch on in more detail in the next paper, that we do have the ability to borrow in advance of need. And if we set these at the highest level for all 3 years, it gives us the ability to exercise that if we need to, if it's advantageous to us. Now, the chances are it won't be advantageous to us, but it just leaves that door open in case we need it. So there's been you will be able to see in the next paper that those limits are set at the maximum for the 3 years, and I'll point that out. The final bit I wanted to talk about in terms of some of the affordability and value for money section on page 100 is about how affordable the capital programme is. And the capital strategy, at the end of the capital strategy in section 18, there's a point that says we assess the affordability of the programme, we set ourselves a limit and say our financing costs cannot exceed 6% of our net revenue budget. Now, as our programme is increasing, we're expecting, and as I've said, the capital programme is putting more pressure on our revenue budget. This is a good measure of how much pressure it's putting on that budget. And we'll see in the next paper that limit, we don't breach that limit, or we're not forecasting to breach that limit over the next 3 years, but we're coming close, at just under 6%. We're at 5.7%. So it's something we need to be really mindful of, is how sustainable is how sustainable is it for us to continue to borrow to fund our capital investment. So it looks like we could do it for the next 3 years and not breach those kind of affordability checks, but actually going forwards, what is our long-term plan for investing in the service without having capital funding and without having sufficient revenue funding to reallocate. So it just highlights that kind of more long-term piece. that we need to look at. But again, we'll continue to look at whether there's funding opportunities for us, whether we can, as a sector, there can be any capital funding made available, or whether there are any specific grant funds and things like that can help us to reduce that borrowing, help us to manage that sustainability and affordability consideration. I think that's all I wanted to say on this paper, so happy to take questions.
Thanks again, Verity. I've got Tom, I've got Paul, I've got Robert and Robin. That'll do for now.
So I've got a comment and then a question. I think just echoing what Robin raised earlier, looking at any opportunities for Section 106, strategic SIL, and just thinking about what can be done, because ultimately if the region is growing, if more housing is getting built, then what we hear from residents time and time again is the need for the infrastructure to be sufficient to support that growth. So, we need to make sure that, I think, as representatives on local authorities, doing what we can to sort of see what those conversations. There are a lot of pressures on strategic SIL, flood risk in our case in Bristol, but I think we should try and make sure we're joining up those conversations. That was my comment. My question was, I actually just wanted to pick up the stuff from 5.18 about the clean air zone in Bristol and sort of the work that's happening there. What is the scale of the need? Because that's what I wasn't entirely clear on. What is the funding need in terms of some of the vehicles you need to upgrade that are in the Bristol area? What are you looking for from Bristol City Council at the moment?
I think when we originally started this conversation, I don't think we knew how much Bristol had available. So we were asked, and I think our head of fleet has said we're planning to replace certain appliances. So rather than white vehicle, it's appliances that he's looked at, and the conversations I've seen are around what is the scope for Bristol to help support the cost of those, which are obviously a lot more expensive than buying a car. But we haven't had firm kind of indication of what that is yet. But I think, I want to say he was looking at four Type Bs and 2 turntable ladders is what I've seen conversations around. But we haven't had confirmed yet how much support we might get for those, but they're not insignificant purchases.
Okay. Well, just an observation then that reopening a political round from last week about Park Street that was planning to draw funding from the Joint Air Quality Unit, and that decision did not go through. So, subject to obviously whatever the Joint Air Quality Unit agree, there's 5.3 million sat there, including for financial assistance schemes that relate to public bodies. So, just saying.
Yeah, we certainly discussed the clean air zone yesterday in various forms. I have now got Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, or make a comment to start with. I'm absolutely delighted, of course, to see the Bath fire station refurb starting and any day now. So that's really great news for the residents of Bath and North East Somerset. So that's really good. So that's just a statement, and I'm really pleased. But it's when you see something positive like that, it's a massive investment, and it is really important to the community. I wanted to ask a question through you, Chair, of Richard, because about a year ago we had a real problem around the clean air zone in Bath, and the council wanting to charge the fire authority for certain vehicles which were in the term of £500,000 or more to replace, particularly the platform. And we gave an assurance that we would be building that into the capital programme. And I've just got confused around the wording of whether that is actually in there or it isn't, because the council's chief executive has now left, and we had to get an agreement whereby that was all right. But I'm just a bit confused about whether we have got that in the programme or whether we haven't, Richard. I'm sorry to take a really local issue, but it is important in terms of the clean air zone in Bath.
So following the issue we had last year, which, as you say, you're fully aware of, the outcome of that was we have a fleet strategy in place which says that I think by 2030 all vehicles will be low emission compliant, and eventually Bath did agree to agree that they would fall in line with our fleet strategy replacement strategy. So it is in the strategy. Bath have agreed it that we can carry on using our vehicles as we've currently got them, and they will accept the fact that they'll be replaced by 2030.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. So
It's just that if the question's asked again, we don't have to go through that whole process again. And my third one was, if we are borrowing for capital, have we built in the, because if you borrow money, then you've got to pay the revenue costs. Is that built into those papers that we've been looking at earlier on?
Yes, absolutely. It's quite a significant cost. When we get to the fourth year, it's over £4 million a year of kind of capital financing costs associated with both the interest and the kind of provision we have to make for the capital repayment. So yes, they're in there.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Just to give you some reassurance, I met with the new Chief Executive on Monday of this week, and we've committed to continue to meet, probably on a quarterly basis, as I do with all the Chief Executives across the unitary authorities. So it's something that I will pick up in our next meeting, just to make sure it's on both our radars. Thank you.
And now we move on to the 3 R's, which are not reading, writing and arithmetic, but Robert, Robin and Richard. So Robert first.
Thank you, Chair. As a Western councillor, I'm particularly interested in the Western refurbishment, and I have been quite hopeful that we are going to see some progress on that in the coming financial year. So I would be pretty disappointed if it is delayed in the hope of saving costs. And in fact, I'm not really sure that it would help with savings, because delays usually tend to lead to increased costs. And the other thing on the refurbishment is that this feasibility study that's going ahead, it seems to me that this has already been done some time ago, so I'm not really convinced, or not really sure why we feel the need to do that again.
Yeah, so we can come back to you and give you the full detail, because Amber Foreman, who's the lead director, is obviously leading on the Western conversation. But what I can say is, one of the things we've chosen to do is to engage an intermediate to understand the capital value of the site, because there's one about the rebuild value of Western, but actually, given the expansion of the area, is it got any kind of value in terms of a development opportunity? So once we know the answer to that question, then if it does have value in terms of capital receipt, then there's a potential we could reinvest that. Again, linking back to the 106 SIL opportunities. Again, it's a conversation I've had at the Chief Executive level around opportunities to work with the local authority around collaboration. So if there's an alternative site that's in a better location from a modelling perspective, then it's something we should absolutely look at. So it's making sure that, one, is there an opportunity to release some capital value in that location, and is there a better location that provides a better service for that local community, recognising the expansion of the area and increase the amount of homes. And if there is an opportunity, then it might be something that might be more cost effective than reinvesting £7 million into the station. So at this point, we're not saying that we're not going to progress forward with the £7 million refurbishment, but we need to do the due diligence to make sure it's still value for money.
And I think we did something like this with Temple, didn't we? Where we sold off some of the land, got a lot of money, and we're able to invest it somewhere else.
I do absolutely take that point, and I think the current location of this fire station isn't really perfect at all. It's in the middle of a housing estate. But it's just that we've already done this work, and we were unable to identify any other suitable sites in the anywhere within Western, really. But yeah, that would be great if I could be kept informed in that going forward.
Thanks, Robert. Robin.
Thank you. Just really a couple of comments about the importance of the capital programme in relation to the revenue budget, and how probably I think local authorities and maybe fire authorities as well tend to underestimate that importance. And I think particularly with this report and the potential for coming up to 5% of our revenue spend will be on capital financing, it does become absolutely key. And I'll go back to the point I think that Tom made about the potential to get money from elsewhere. I think it would be useful to separate out what is the capital spend in order to renew and improve existing fleet and buildings, and the capital expenditure that will be necessary in order to meet increased demand due to the increase in homes, in people, and whatever. And I think to have that separation and to feed that into, for example, local authority, local plans, which are going through at the moment, as the increased need for servicing within local authorities, I think it would be useful to see that, because I think we need to be pushing harder, and we need to keep on pushing harder for Section 106 and development financing to come for the service improvements that we need to make to the capital programme. Because going back to the point, 4.7% is within the limits of what we should be spending, but it is over 75% of that limit, and it is considerably higher than we've had in previous years. Very, very considerably higher, so we need to mitigate that.
Thanks, Robin. Richard?
Actually, my point was going to pick up Tom's point about accessing developers' contributions, but Robin's also made a very valid and helpful point. In December, my Bristol Planning Committee approved almost 1,000 homes in 3 big schemes. Each of those big schemes were opposed by the local NHS, who wanted funds, of course. We were advised by the Planning Obligations Manager, Jim Cliff, in Bristol's case, that since the NHS had no plans, even very draft plans, to actually expand local facilities, it would be inappropriate to respond positively then. But he did say that Bristol is now developing through officers a mechanism to actually access strategic sale for actually a contribution for the NHS. Now, it seems to me, with my Avon fire hat on, if the NHS is going to benefit, we ought to benefit. I'm happy to raise that with the chief plan.
Thanks, Richard. Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that, because it's been a long-running issue about sort of trying to get the NHS to catch up in terms of its strategic planning of its facilities, rather than waiting for all the homes to be built and then trying to figure out what it's going to do, because that feels quite backwards to me. But anyway, but I know there's a piece of work happening around that, but it makes sense to make sure we look at the fire authority as well in that context, because strategic sale has been used for blue light services before. Bristol made, I think it was £1.5 million contribution to the new Trinity Road police station that's being built as part of a affordable housing scheme opposite the Trinity Centre. So we know that precedent is there, and it's obviously just looking at those competing demands. But I think getting to a bit more of a strategic place would definitely be helpful for moving some of this forward. Because I think the NHS issue is they're just objecting to every scheme now, aren't they? And what we want to be having is a strategic conversation with them and getting the planning sorted.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to everyone for contributing on that. We have 2 recommendations here, which we'll deal with as one. We are asked to approve the 2026-2029 capital strategy in Appendix 1, and also approve the 2026-2029 capital programme, noting associated funding sources in Appendix 2. So I'd like to propose that we do so. May I have a seconder, please? Tom? Are there any votes against? Are there any abstentions? And all those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous again. So that deals with that agenda item, and we move on to the last item, which is Treasury Management Strategy, including prudential and Treasury Management Indicators and MRP Policy Statement.
Thank you. It's the last one, you'll be pleased to hear, last one. So this one is really heavily linked to the paper that we've just seen on capital programme. So this paper is all about our Treasury management activities and the strategy that we're taking over the next few years. I think my first key point to note is that we prepare a Treasury management strategy in line with SIPFA guidance and the Prudential Code. The key point to note is that there have been no changes in the requirements of the SIPFA Code in comparison to last year. So there's no significant changes that we've had to incorporate in our Treasury management strategy as a result of any guidance from SIPFA. So the strategy that is presented for you today is broadly similar in terms of structure and content to previous strategies that have been approved by the authority. They are, however, updated for the latest information financially and kind of forecast information from our Treasury management advisors. Just in the background section of this paper on page 122, paragraph 3.2 just confirms again that we use Bristol City Council for some Treasury management activities and services. They are not an advisor, and it just reiterates here that the Fire Authority is the body that has the responsibility for implementing and managing our Treasury management policies and practices. So we do use Bristol City Council, but they have no responsibility for our overall Treasury management activities. They are also not an advisor. So something we've done, and I think I probably mentioned this time last year, because we knew borrowing was upcoming because of our capital plans, that we were looking to engage in a Treasury management advisor. We have done that. From May 2025, we appointed MUFG as an independent Treasury management advisor. They're on a 2-year contract. And those of you that were able to attend the training last Friday would have met Adam. So he's our contact, and he has assisted with bringing together this strategy and the information for you today to make sure that it's in line with all the relevant requirements and also aligned with our future plans as a service. The final paragraph in the background here just talks about the Bristol City Council arrangement again, and just highlights here that the current Bristol City Council contract is due to expire at the end of March 2026. We're in the process of renewing and putting a new contract in place, and anything that's in this strategy is based on the assumption that the Treasury management services that Bristol provide will remain relatively unchanged going forwards. If I move on to section 5 and the key considerations, paragraph 5.1 talks about what we are required to have in place in order to have effective Treasury management. So we need to have an annual Treasury management strategy and an annual Treasury management policy statement. That policy statement is included within our strategy in Appendix 1. That Treasury management strategy includes both a borrowing strategy and an investment strategy. I won't go through the strategy in lots of detail, but generally, to give a high-level overview, our borrowing strategy will be, as we've said, we know we need to borrow to fund our capital programme. We've kind of exhausted lots of other internal sources of funding for that. So we know that we need to borrow. What we're trying to do at the moment is ensure that we fully utilise any internal sources of borrowing. So that would basically be any cash that we have because of cash flow fluctuations. I'm working on looking at that in detail over the next 6 weeks, because what I'm trying to do is delay any borrowing into 26-27. So if we can use our internal resources for the next few weeks, then hopefully we can delay any borrowing and make those borrowing decisions in the next financial year. But our strategy will likely be to borrow over a relatively short term, because interest rates are still expected to drop further, and then refinance those loans to try and take advantage of and lock in lower rates in future. That's our general kind of borrowing strategy. And then from an investment perspective, because we're utilising a lot of our internal cash resources and we've used up all of our capital reserves, our cash is not as high as it's previously been. We have an arrangement with Bristol City Council where they pool our cash with their bank balances, and they manage that on a daily basis. They sweep their accounts and use overmarket and lots of overnight and money market funds to get the best return on the cash that they have, which includes ours. And then we receive a monthly kind of interest payment from them based on a sterling overnight interest, and they do take a deduction from that. We are assuming all of that still remains in place. There's probably just less cash there that is allocated to us because we have less. We will expect to have less in our bank account. The strategy does include lots of information around creditworthiness policies and who we can and can't invest with and things like that, in case we expected to be doing that, in case that did happen in the next 3 years. The chances are it won't, because we don't expect to have significant free cash to do so, but it's there in case we need it. The third bullet point under paragraph 5.1 just talks about treasury management practices. Members who were here a couple of years ago may remember I brought the treasury management practices to this meeting 2 years ago for approval. The approval can then be delegated outside of this committee, outside of the Fire Authority, and doesn't necessarily need to come back to committee. But I've reviewed those policies during 25-26, but it means that they need another level of scrutiny. It can't be me that scrutinises them. So they will be coming back to Policy and Resources Committee for scrutiny at the next meeting in April. So it's just to kind of reassure you that they've been reviewed. They just need to go through that scrutiny process, which will happen in the next couple of months. Appendix 2 of this paper is a minimum revenue provision statement. So this is a statement that confirms our approach to making provision within our revenue budget for the capital elements of our borrowing. And again, it becomes increasingly important as we move to more borrowing over the next few years. It's a legal requirement. And there was some updated guidance which is detailed in the strategy, which talks about what we need to do and what that statement needs to include, which we have then included. And again, we've used our Treasury Management advisors to ensure that we haven't missed anything there. There are the requirement of this minimum revenue provision is that it's prudent, and they give you 4 recommended methods for calculating it, or you can choose your own, but you have to be able to prove that it's prudent. We have chosen one of the 4 recommended ones, so we've got a very strong case to say that the way that we're calculating minimum revenue provision is prudent, and that's all defined in Appendix 2. And then the last bit of this paper are the prudential and treasury management indicators. So I touched on those briefly there in Appendix 3 on page 167. And I touched on those briefly when I talked about the capital strategy and programme, because they're all very heavily linked. So all of these indicators are driven by our capital expenditure. So the table at the top of Appendix 3 shows what our capital expenditure is expected to be over the next 3 years. It shows what our financing costs are expected to be based on that capital programme and the borrowing need that it drives. And you can see there the calculation for the financing cost to net revenue stream, which is the 6% that we talked about as an affordability indicator, and how we're coming close to that by the end of the 3 years. The other thing to point out is the external debt and then the operational and authorised boundary that I mentioned. So if you see these bottom few lines of this table, our external debt requirement is equal to our capital financing requirement. So that is our underlying need to borrow, which grows because we have investment needs and no other sources of funding. That grows across the 3 years. But what we see is the maximum it reaches is 47 million, just over 47 million by the end of the 3rd year. And what we've done is set our operational boundary equal to that level for all 3 years, as I said, to give us the opportunity to borrow in advance of need if we think it's advantageous to do so. It's probably not that likely, but it gives us that opportunity. And then again, the authorised limit is the one that we legally cannot exceed, and has a £1 million buffer on top of that operational limit. These indicators are requested to be approved today, but they are scrutinised at the Policy and Resources Committee on a quarterly basis, and they can be updated at any time. So if our capital plans change or if funding changes, if the situation changes, we can revise these at any point in time and we bring them back for approval. I think that was all I was going to say on Treasury Management Strategy, and then happy for questions.
Thank you again, Verity. Do we have any questions or comments? No? Blimey.
Oh, yeah.
Yasin.
Oh.
For the operational boundary for external debt, the current year is 12,299, and the estimated next 3 years, you just would like the same level. Why is the same level? Thank you.
It's because it's the level that we expect to borrow, so it gives you a limit over which a limit to make sure that you're not borrowing more than that. So it's a kind of a check to say we are borrowing within our limits. What we've done is set it at that maximum level for the 3 years, because there are times when it's advantageous to borrow earlier than you need and then invest that money. The SIPFA code allows you to do that, but it's limited. There are limited times when that would be advantageous, because there's normally a cost of carry, so the cost you're paying on the loan is normally more than you'd earn in interest to invest it, so you normally wouldn't do it. But if a situation arrived where we thought interest rates were going to move in the right way, we might borrow earlier, and it just gives us that opportunity to borrow up to our maximum at any point in time. It's highly unlikely that we would use that, but it just gives us that opportunity just in case. Because there's such a significant cost associated with our capital programme, if that opportunity did arise, we would look to use it, and it just gives us that flexibility.
Thank you, Yasin. At this point, I'll just say thank you again to Verity on all our behalves for your support, for your number crunching, for your everything else that you've done to get us to this position. So thank you for that. I know you've got a break next week for half term. I'm not saying a holiday because I know you'll be surrounded by other people's children. But I think it's well deserved. So we'll just deal with the final recommendations. And we are asked to approve the Treasury Management Strategy for 26-27 to 28-29 from Appendix 1, including the approval of the investment strategy at Section 11 of Appendix 1. We are also asked to approve the minimum revenue provision statement 26-27 and approve the prudential and treasury management indicators in Appendix 3. So I'd like to propose we do all that. May I have a seconder? Dan, thank you very much. Are there any votes against? Are there any abstentions? All those in favour? Brilliant, thank you. So the final item is just the date of the next meeting. Tuesday the 17th of March 2026, 12:15 hours, we have a tour of Severn Park. You'd be amazed if you haven't had a chance to look around. Everything that's there, even accommodation and so forth for the trainees. We'll then have a buffet lunch, and you will be seated ready for your meeting at 1:45. And then we will have the meeting at 2 o'clock. And if anybody has not confirmed yet, can you please respond to Emma by Monday the 2nd of March to enable catering, etc. to be sorted out. So thank you very much. 4 minutes over, so that's not so bad. And I'll see you all again soon.